All right, semi-live coding. I've got a few slides. First, I found out late yesterday that I'm the Sass lady, but really I'm here to talk about CSS. I do love CSS. It's resilient, it's declarative, it's contextual, and I think we often mistake that declarative syntax for something static. And I don't think CSS is static in any way. In fact, it's this like crazy audacious project to design for an unknown canvas that changes constantly and is interactive. And like, who would do that? That's nuts. So we're going to do that. I also do run a small agency, and we're doing all sorts of client work. And this whole idea came out of, we were building this day planner for a client. It's for schools to schedule their days. And I was like, I looked at this and I said, well, that's a grid. Let's not go there yet. This is a grid. I can start, like, there's ways I can lay this out. There's new tools I can use. So we're going to come back to that. But first, I want to play a little bit. Cool. Let's jump in here and just play a little bit with using some grids and some variables and see how they work. And then we'll go back to that day planner. So just to get these buttons centered, I'm just going to say, display grid, and then I'm going to justify content center. And this isn't just a grid feature justifying content. That's about box alignment. I'm going to align content center as well. That's going to do it on the block axis. Right? Oh, you know why it's not? Because I don't have a min height here of 100% or 100 VH. Let's go with viewport height. Great. Let's add a gap in there. We now have true actual gutters without special math for them. Let's get a default on these buttons. So they have a background color that's blue by default. Let's go with a light blue. Yeah. All right. Border is dark blue. Cool. So there's some default buttons. Let's see. Let's give them a padding as well. That's just half of an M. But let's come back up here and say, what if we had consistent padding? What if we had a like pad variable that was 1M, and then we could use it here to say we're going to use that variable pad, and down here we're going to take half of it. So we're going to calc pad divided by 2. Cool. All right, so you see some of the things we're doing. We've got variables, we can reuse them. There's some other fun stuff like we can say data button danger. Oh, let's use a variable for this too. So instead of light blue there, let's do a button color with a background of light, or with a fallback of light blue. That'll work. And now here we just need to change the button color to, this is danger. We'll go with, pink is dangerous. Great. Yes. I like it. We can also change this at media queries. I don't know why we want to for the color, although it'd be fun. We can change the padding to say 2M at a media query. So that's fun. Now it's changing when I go back past that breakpoint. So there's a lot of fun things that we can do having DOM-aware variables and using grids. So we're going to play with some of that. I've also taken this farther, and I rebuilt the entirety of SUSE using variables and calc functions in Sass. I highly recommend that you don't ever use it. There's no reason to do that, but it works. And it's, in fact, creating those background images and the entire layout and everything else based purely on CSS variables. Yeah, don't use that. Like, really seriously, don't use it. Don't use SUSE at all anymore. We're past that, but Jen Simmons can tell you more about that. So going back to this day planner, I was like, let's map those patterns to familiar vocabulary. So that's what we're going to do. And for me, familiar vocabulary is CSS. And I thought, OK, so what if I could take in an API that just gives me some variables? My day starts at 9. My day is going to end at 18. I'm going to define some events on that day. This one starts at 1 p.m. and goes to 2 p.m. That's the wrong syntax there. That should be a semicolon. Who cares? I was like, I'm going to need a little bit of JavaScript to get into this. So I took a class on it. I thought I was going to go learn JavaScript, but it turned out I could only be introduced to it because JavaScript cannot be learned. So I did that. And here's what I came up with. Here's a day planner. And we're just going to sort of live code it quick. And by live code, I mean uncomment sections of my code until we're there. So I started with some data. We've got the temperatures for the whole day. And I threw in a couple events. This is from last Monday. So I've got those. And then I started laying out some HTML. I did this in Vue because it was a quick way to start using JavaScript without knowing JavaScript, only having been introduced. This gives me the styles that I wanted. Is this text large enough? I'll go a little bigger on that. So I got the styles that I wanted from Vue. They're being passed in for the day. And then I've got components for the temps and the events. Let's start by getting some basic structure to this. So we've got the day planner. We're going to give it that mid-height, min-height, and a gutter. And then we're going to display grid and set up this grid area layout. We just do a little bit of ASCII art. We want the header, the little edit form that I made, some temps, and then some events. And those are going to take up a little space differently. There we go. That's not quite right. We've got a row gap there. Oh, that's right. We didn't place things in our areas. So let's place those in their areas so they fall into place. The header goes in the head. The edit goes in edit, and so on. There we go. That's more like it. Our events down at the bottom. Now we're going to use some variables and calc to do the audacious part, where we take the hours in the day is the end of the day minus the start of the day. If we take the last hour in the day minus the first hour in the day, we get the total hours in the day. We're going to do 4 columns per hour so that we get quarter-hour increments. And then we're going to figure out the columns that we need based on that. So the hours in the day times the columns per hour. That gives us how many columns we'll need on the grid. We're going to give each one a column size that is a min-max of nothing all the way up to equal fragments, 1 fragment pieces. And then our day template is going to repeat a pattern that is the number of columns we need in the day and the column size that we've set. So I've got variables for all of that, calculations to figure out what's going on, all based on just a start time and an end time for the day. Let's visualize that before we move on. So to visualize it, we're just going to create a linear gradient that's 1 pixel of a color. And we'll set that size to be 100% divided by the number of hours in the day. And that should give us a repeating gradient that shows us the grid of our day. And now I've got this way of adjusting where the day starts or ends. So you can see that grid updating. We don't have things aligned to the grid yet, but we're well on our way. Let's move over to events. Let's start laying out those events on the day. So I did something similar here. For each event, I have the start time, the end time, and the category. Category is something we'll come back to. But first, let's get those events laid out. So we'll have the events display on that grid. I would have set the grid on the parent if we had subgrid. I do have a nightly version of Firefox with subgrid, but it crashes when I use it. So we're not going to go there. We're going to use this trick for now. And we're just going to grab that day template we created earlier and put it in place for our events. Now that's going to be pretty ugly. Yeah, good. That's what we like. So let's just give them all a default where they span from the first line to the last line so that they look okay when we haven't done anything with them. Now I wonder why our events are starting over here. That seems weird to me. This should be much larger if you're going to see it. All right. What is happening there? What grid is that on? We can look at the grids here that we've created. Oh, we've got a double S in that events. That's not going to work. That was back in the day planner. Setup. Events. Yes. All right. So that should give us our areas now the way we want them. This grid inspector in Firefox is pretty fantastic. Thank you, Jen. All right, so back to where we were. Let's get ourselves some event colors. So here we're going to take that category input, and we're going to just define a couple hues for our categories. So anything that's undefined is going to have a hue of 0, so we get a red color. Anything that's marked as personal is going to be 190. Work is 90 because Oddbird's color is orange, so had to. And then travel at 240. And I didn't come up with those magically. I played around and hit up and down on the hue wheel until I found the colors I wanted. All right, so I'm going to take those hues. The category hue is going to be the category that I pass in, or 0. I'm passing in a category that's calling one of the variable presets that I've created. So I pass in up here, just call the variable with this category name. And then down here, I've set up some category names that can be called. And then I'm creating a background color that is HSL, taking that category hue or 0 and giving me back a color. And the same with the border at a slightly darker color, same hue. And then I set that to the background of the border, give us some padding. And let's see how those, great. So now we've got some colors based on the categories. This seems to be working all right. Is this going okay for you? Great. All right, so now let's position those events. To position them, I'm going to find out the start column for each event by taking the event start minus the day start. That'll find out how far after the day has started should this event appear. And then I'm multiplying that by the columns per hour to figure out what column it should be in, and adding 1 because these lines are 1 indexed. So we don't want an off by 1 error there. And we can find the end column the same way, taking the end of the event minus the day start. We could also do this by taking the end of the event minus the start of the event and doing a span instead, but this will work. And then we'll set that as the grid column start and the grid column end for each event. Now, I didn't promise to make this beautiful, so sorry, but there it works. You can see they're sort of stacking up in a way that isn't really utilizing the space the way we would like to. So let's just clean up some of that. Here, we'll take care of some of that overflow. And yeah, that's the first thing here. Get those out of the way so it's not quite as ugly. Yeah, now it's only ugly when I hover over it. But, you know, I'm not doing a design talk. So grid autoflow dense is going to let me collapse that a little bit more. The algorithm's a little smarter about pulling everything up. There we go. So that works. That got us the day planner we wanted. And we were able to put that together in an afternoon. I was expecting like lots of JavaScript positioning to try to get these things in place. And instead, the grid algorithms just did it for us, passing in a little bit of data to CSS. And I love this idea that CSS can start taking back these things from JavaScript that JavaScript was never intended to do for us, like lay out our pages We can now inject CSS directly with data and let it do the math for us. Let's play around with those temperatures a little bit and see what we can do. So I'm passing in the highest temperature and the lowest temperature to get the full scale, similar to how I passed in the start time and the end time of the day. And then I'm passing in for each row of this table, or for each cell of the table, the particular temp value and also its index, which we'll get to, because I'm going to use that for something else. But we'll start by laying those out. So we'll give ourselves a bit of a grid for the temperatures. This is just getting them in columns and rows. And then for each row, we will use that day template again so that they're on the same template as the other grid. OK, not yet. Let's lay them out. The grid column end, we're telling it instead of exactly what line to end on, we're giving it a span. So each one is going to span a single hour on our grid instead of trying to shove into quarter hours. Now they're lined up with our hour lines. And if we change the start or end of the day, we'll see those stay aligned to our background. They're not technically on the same grid because we don't have subgrid, but we're using the same grid definition, and that works for us because it's not using intrinsic sizing. It's using explicit sizes that I've given. And we're just going to use a writing mode vertical left to right to line up those hours, give us a little bit more space, turn them upright. That's pretty clever. That's been around since IE6, so if you're afraid of using that, maybe don't be. All right. So for each cell, we're going to find the total range, again, is the high temp minus the low temp. We'll create a grid from that that has all those rows. I gave it a minimum of 1 pixel this time just because I don't want these things to disappear if we're on a small screen, and a maximum of 1 fraction so they can expand on a larger screen. And then this before statement is actually going to give us the bar we want for the bar chart. And that grid row is going to be based on the high temp plus 1 for 1 indexing, minus this temperature divided by -1 because we want it offset from the bottom. Sorry, I lost my place there. All right, a little margin just so we have gaps between the things. There we go. There's all of our temperatures laid out as a bar chart. We have that data. Let's move all of those numbers down to the end. Using grid row -1, we're going to go to the end, the final line of the explicit grid, and we're going to automatically generate some implicit grid afterwards. And those are just going to sit on the implicit grid down at the bottom. There they are. We've got a little funny thing going on here with the numbers that are at 0 because we've set our range too specifically. So let's adjust that range a bit. Let's say that the range, we'll use this min temp value if we have it, or we'll fall back to the low temperature that we've passed in, or we'll fall back to freezing. We've got a couple fallbacks there. We're going to set this min temp based on the low temp minus however we decide to pad it. So we'll start by padding it with 2 at the bottom. 2 extra degrees there, just so that we have some padding. But we can adjust that however we want. So let's do that in our dev tools. Where do we have pad? There it is. So we can see that just adding some padding at the bottom or breaking everything, but that's why we don't add pixels. I don't know why Firefox always wants to add pixels there, but it does. And we survive. All right, so let's get some colors on those too, based on the temperatures that we're at. So to do that, I'm going to start by getting a temperature fraction. This is just the temperature divided by the range. And the range is the number of temperatures in the day, so I'm just trying to get, like, where are we in this range that we're looking at? So I'm taking the temperature, dividing it by the range, and then the hue range I want is 180 degrees. So I'm going to move us into that range. So calc the temperature fraction times the hue range. So now I'm going from 0 to 180 instead of from whatever my temperature range was. And then I'm going to put that here in the background to create a hue. Let's see what that does. All right. So I've got this 180 degree hue range. It doesn't look quite right to me. I don't know about purple to green as a temperature range. That's not exactly what I want. So I had to play around a bit with this to find these numbers. But the first thing that I did here was a hue direction. I wanted to flip the direction that we're going. Let's get rid of the offset for now. So to flip the direction, we just multiply it by -1. Now we're going the other way around the hue wheel. And then playing around, I found an offset of 90 degrees, got me where I wanted to be. And really, we can just do that right here. So where do I get the hue offset here? There we go. And now we have the colors we want. But let's take it a bit farther and say, what if we animated those coming in? That would look pretty cool. So we're going to create this growing effect. And I'm just going to put a couple variables in place, even though I haven't set them yet. A couple variables that have fallbacks so that I can pass in an easing and a speed and a delay if I want to. But for now, those should all just animate together. OK. Not the prettiest animation, but we'll work on it. Let's start by changing that transform origin so that it comes from the bottom. It didn't feel like refreshing on that one. There we go. That's a little bit better. But what if we took the index from each one? I would use nth child selectors here, but I would have to be explicit about every single one, and I'd have to know exactly how many I need, and I didn't want that. I would love to use counter as well, but I can't use counter as a variable outside of the content property. So both of those failed. I would have liked them better, but I'm just having JavaScript pass in the index, where am I in my temperatures in my day, from 1 to the end. And I'm going to set a different delay based on the index. So if I could use a counter, a CSS counter there, I would, but we're just taking the index from JavaScript. And then I'm adding 50 milliseconds to each one. There we go. That's starting to look fun, but I bet we can do better. Let's create some standard easings here. I copied and pasted these from somewhere. I didn't make up these numbers. Who cares? They work. Right. So we've created some standard easings. And then up here, we're passing in an ease from JavaScript. So we set that in JavaScript. All right, let's go find it. Yeah, ease. I'm going to pass in var outback. So that's one of my predefined ones. Let's do in outback first, just to see what that's like. Fun. Great. But outback probably makes more sense. These Mac keyboards are great. Yeah, that's looking good. And there we have it. That's my day planner made entirely with CSS, just passing in the data from JavaScript. That's what I was looking for. Yes, thank you. So it's crazy, and it works. And then I saw other charts, and I was like, what can I do? Can I create some more charts? Can I do plotting data on 3 dimensions? So I've got an X, Y, and a Z for the size. And also the Z is changing the color hue. It's all the same techniques that I was using there. This one is manipulating clip paths instead. The variables are being used to change the points on a clip path polygon. I don't love how it looks yet, but that's why I hire designers. I saw this talk at Beyond Tellerrand in Germany, and I thought, well, that would be fun to make, so I made that one too. We can shuffle all these because I did it in Vue, and it's got those cool things. But we can also adjust, the sizing of everything. Make things a little bigger, make them smaller. We can add some new invaders. And then I'd love to figure out how to shoot these invaders. I haven't solved that problem yet. We need some way to kill them. So work on that. Let me know when you find a solution. I also saw a talk a couple weeks ago at VueConf. Crystal was showing off this Monster Slayer animation that she was doing in Vue, and I thought, that's fun, we could do that. What we'll need in the CSS is we'll need to pass in the sprite. We'll need to tell the CSS how big is this box, and how many steps do we have across to get to the end of it. And once we have those pieces of information, we should be able to automate by just passing in a little bit of data for the box size, and then which row we're on, and how many steps across. So we've got this idle, we've got that. We can see the code here. Let's just pull up sprites. CSS sprites view, not that one. The components, yeah. So the default there is monsters. We're passing in the source, the columns, and the rows. And there we go. The 3 actions that we want to show are an idle at row 0, an attack at row 1, and a special attack at row 2. And there we have them. Idle, attack, special attack. You can tell it's special because it's yellow. Yes. Good. But I was like, does it work with different things? So let's pass in a different prop here. Let's go with Metroid. I created some data for Metroid 2. Let's see if that gives us, yes. Samus running, left or right, the 2 runs you need. All right, so that worked. That's really it. I mean, what else can we do with this? I would love to see more uses of this. But to me, the point here is CSS really, truly is awesome. It really is a designed language. It's resilient. It's contextual. It's dynamic. It's built to be dynamic. It's really solving this crazy problem of, can we design for unknown users on an unknown canvas, on an unknown device, on an unknown network, and have it still get to them, and have the browser solve lots of those variable problems without us having to specify anything. That's how CSS is designed. We give a couple suggestions, we pass it some data, we say something meaningful, and the browser takes all of this information, what we pass it, what the user passes in, what the context of the device is, and the browser is the only person that knows all of that context and is able to start putting it together. And that's audacious. That's like, it's absurd that we're able to do this. So go out there and use CSS to do crazy things, and don't give up all the power to other languages that claim they know better. Thank you.